Okay, you are going to be solving problems with variables on both sides, and I would like you to open up your books to page 145 and complete the table. The equations are already given to you. You need to substitute the minutes in. So for the first example, you have 10 minutes. Plug in your 10 where you see M and calculate, and you're going to do it both for plan A and for plan B. And then you're going to answer the questions 2, 3, and 4 in EdPuzzle. So make sure that you are copying down your work and calculating what your answers will be. Okay, now that you have done page 145 and identified which one was the better value, we are going to be looking at example 1, where we are isolating variables, but you have variables on both sides. So when we have variables on both sides, you want to move them to the same side of the equation, which means to the same side of the equal sign. I'm going to do number 1 with you, and we're going to try an example on our own. My tip, my suggestion, is always going to be to move the smaller variable over. Okay, so move the smaller variable over. And the reason is when you move the smaller variable over to where the larger variable is, you're going to keep the coefficient to that variable term as a positive, which is going to give you one less reason to make an error due to positive or negative signs. So when we are solving this, and if I will write 8 plus 4d is equal to 5d. Just like we have been doing in class, you always want to draw that wall right down the middle of your page. And we want to move the variables to the same side. And like I mentioned, move this smaller one. And 4 is less than 5. And what we're doing is we are creating zeros, right? Because this here, when you take those together, those become 0. 4d take away 4d is 0. On the left side of your equal sign, you are now left with the number 8. And on the right side, you will subtract those two terms. So when you subtract 5d minus 4d, you have 1d. And do you remember, do we need to write that coefficient of 1? No, we do not, because that is invisible math. So our answer is 8d. Always make sure that your answer is correct. And in order to do so, you're going to write the original problem, but instead of writing the variable, we will put parentheses, and then in place of those parentheses, you'll put the answer that you got, which in this case was 8. Solve as you normally would using order of operations. 5 times 8 is 40. You're going to multiply this first. 4 times 8 is 32 plus 8. Don't forget you are checking, so that's your question mark. And on the right side we have 40, and 8 plus 32 is 40. We are correct. Okay? All right, so let's do these examples. Hopefully you've already completed them, and we'll just go through and see how you did. For example A, again, we want to move the variables to the same side. Given the choice between 8a and 5a, 5 is smaller than 8, so we will move 5a to the left side of the equation. On the right, that becomes a 0. You're left with 21 on the right-hand side, and on the left-hand side, 8 minus 5 is 3a. Now you have one step left in order to isolate, and you're going to divide both sides by 3. Because we want the coefficient to a to become a 1. And we all know that this is 1. So a is equal to 7. You then need to check your answer by, instead of writing the unknown variable, write parentheses. And then you can substitute the answer you got, and we're going to check and see if that works. 8 times 7 is 56. 5 times 7 is 35 plus 21. This is still a question. 35 plus 21 is 56. So that works out great. A is done. We'll do the same thing for letter B, draw the wall. We need to move one of the variable terms over. Which one are we going to choose? 3x, because it is the smaller value, and the opposite of positive 3x is negative 3x. So subtract 3x from both sides. Here we have a 0. Negative 7 is equal to 5x plus 23. You still need to isolate the variable term of 5x, so we need to subtract 23 from both sides. Oops, put that in the wrong spot. These become a 0. You have 5x on the right-hand side. Now over here, you are adding those or combining. So negative 7 plus negative 23 is negative 30. And our last step, we want that coefficient of x to be a 1. In order to make it a 1, we know that 5 divided by 5 is 1. And we will divide both sides by 5. So you have x is equal to negative 6. You're going to check your solution. That's how you make sure you're getting the correct answer. Rewrite everything with parentheses and substitute with the answer that you got. And again, we're checking, it's a question still. 3 times negative 6 is negative 18 on the left side. 8 times negative 6 is negative 48 on the right-hand side. Bring down the plus 23. Negative 8 minus negative 7. You can do that as an addition if you want and go add the opposite. So it becomes negative 18 plus negative 7. That's going to be negative 25. And on the right-hand side, we have two different signs. We have a negative and we have a positive. So we will subtract those and you get negative 25. And that checks out as well. All right, so let's do another example. And again, we have variables on both sides. So we're going to start off by writing the original equation. And the goal is to figure out what does n equal. How are we going to do that? So as before, we're going to draw the wall. Question now, do we subtract 6n from both sides, or do we subtract 4n? And as I mentioned before, you want to subtract the smaller value because that's going to keep your coefficient as positive. On the right-hand side, 4n take away 4n is 0. You are left with negative 5. On the left side, you have 6n minus 2n, and we all know that 6 minus 4 is 2. So we'll say 2n, and you still have that negative 1. So this is actually going to require two steps because you do need to isolate the variable term before you can solve for the variable itself. So we now need to add 1 to both sides in order to get the variable term of 2n by itself. Negative 1 plus 1 also becomes 0. On the left, you have the variable term. On the right, remember that these are being combined. Negative 5 plus 1 will give you with negative 4. And since 2n means 2 times n, how do we make that coefficient a 1? And we know that in order to make a 1, you're going to divide by 2 because 2 divided by 2 is equal to 1. Whatever you do to one side of the equation, you must do the same to the other. You now have 1n on the left, and we have negative 4 divided by positive 2, which will give you negative 2. Do we have to write that negative 1 in front of the n? By now you know that that is a invisible 1, so we can just write it as n. At this point, we are going to check if our answer is correct. So anywhere you had your variable, you will write parentheses. And we will substitute our answer, which we got negative 2. And we're going to check, does this equal the same thing? On the left side, 6 times negative 2 is negative 12 minus 1. On the right side, 4 times negative 2 is negative 8 minus 5. Negative 12 minus 1 is negative 13. And negative 8 minus 5 is also negative 13. So the answer checks. This is correct. Okay. I would like for you to now try examples A and B, and you will enter your answer on Edpuzzle.